Drone warfare. It's all the rage these days thanks to the Russian invasion of Ukraine. If you were to go online to the cesspool that is Twitter, or formerly known as Twitter, you could be mistaken for thinking that Russia is a nation of extreme mega uber super giga brain absolute giga brain geniuses, yeah I said giga twice, who invented the concept, but that's just not true. Nor is it true that the comments on the rag known as Sky News Australia, amongst others, are true in the fact that drones will apparently make everything obsolete. So every time there's a new military toy, it's the same story. Everything is now obsolete. We must throw all the toys out of the pram and never invest in these old items again. But what if I told you that's all just a bunch of crap? That the warfare in Ukraine is not normal. It will not be the norm should superpowers go toe-to-toe, like actual superpowers. Drones will be a part, yes, but they can only work in support with other weapons. And this is true for sea power too. Drone boats will not replace warships and crews. So let's just have a look a bit further into the history, because the drones in Ukraine are not the beginning, they are just a continued evolution of already established practices. That line from Fallout, "War never changes," is bullcrap. War does change. It changes several times, but it doesn't change so dramatically that you can't recognize it anymore. Continuous patterns do occur and evolutions do occur, particularly when we consider warfare in the air and at sea.
Someone should make a YouTube channel called that.
My god, what an idea!
When we talk about drone warfare in 2025, people tend to think immediately of FPV drones. These little buzzing devils that are as bone-chilling as a Stuka bomber. In reality though, this is just one type of drone. See, drone warfare has been occurring for years, quite literally decades, because this is a MOS. It's a drone. It's a decoy deployed from submarines that is intended to spoof torpedoes and enemy submarines. If you want to be technical, this here is a drone. Yeah, Sputnik was a drone, albeit a very basic one that just beeps at you. The V1 rockets and the V2 rockets were drones. If you think about it, an FPV drone is just a smaller, more portable V1 rocket system. Drones are not new. What is new is the fact that they are now individual smaller drones being used to bomb soldiers directly and vehicles. But it didn't start to really take effect in Ukraine. One of the first real uses of drones, as we know them today, actually occurred way back in 2016 during the Battle of Mosul. A lot of information for this next bit comes directly from Australian soldiers who were on the ground serving as advisors that I have met through research and through work. So I can't reveal their identities and I can't reveal everything they know because, well, they couldn't tell me everything they know because it's classified. Certain information like this will remain classified for the ongoing foreseeable future, so just be wary, there are some holes in what I'm going to say. I can't help it, and they're not about to risk their careers and freedoms to reveal classified information to me. In late 2016, Iraqi and Kurdish forces supported by Western advisors and air power were pushing towards the Islamic State stronghold of Mosul. The fall of Mosul would break ISIS control over northern Iraq, forcing it back into Syria. It is hard to state just how important this city was to ISIS. It was here within the walls of the Great Mosque of Al-Nuri that the Caliphate declared its beginning and its intention. The city was home to at the time around 1.5 million people, a notable drop from 2.5 million before ISIS took it over, with the Armenians, Yazidi and Assyrians all driven out of the city, and often massacred in acts of genocide. As a sidebar, what happened to the Yazidi, particularly Yazidi women and girls, is so forgotten by the world and yet so horrifying I can't speak about it on YouTube due to fear of my channel being taken away due to the nature of the sex crimes and abhorrent crimes against humanity. It's worth remembering what happened to the Yazidi. To prepare for the inevitable slaughter that would be urban combat in a city of this size, coalition air forces assisted the ground troops in destroying targets such as supply depots and artillery. The Australian contribution to this effort against ISIS is known as Operation Okra, and it included a flight of Hornets along with ground forces predominantly from the SASR and 2 commando regiments. Prior to the battle, Islamic State forces had dug an elaborate tunnel system and set up pits to create a blanket of smoke over the city, with the intent of blinding Western forces in their support of the Iraqis. Concurrently, they had also covered the city with IEDs, hardpoints, and they attempted in some cases to create fatal funnels for advancing troops. There was no way the Islamic State could have won the fight, numbering an estimated 10 or so thousand at the time when compared to the 60,000 Iraqi army and 40,000 Kurdish Peshmerga, but they could and would kill hundreds. On the 16th of October 2016, Phase 1 of the operation to capture the city began, with the Iraqi armed forces moving into the city at sunrise on the 17th. The coalition of Kurds and Iraqis would capture hundreds of square kilometres of territory to the east of the city and part of the southeastern districts of Mosul itself. Peshmerga and Iraqi forces would continue surrounding the city, with Iraqi forces attempting to advance into the city centre, triggering a small uprising against ISIS, which was quickly put down by the militants. By the 1st of November, operations to enter the city of Mosul proper would officially begin, and it is here we start to see the beginning of drone warfare, employed in a similar way to what we are now seeing on our feeds every day in Ukraine. As Iraqi forces pushed deeper and deeper into the densely populated city, reports of buzzing sounds followed by large explosions were reported to Australian advisors on the ground. This was deemed very quickly to be cheaply purchased drones with IEDs strapped underneath them. Think RPG warheads, think grenades that have been sort of amended so that when they drop the pins pulled out automatically, and also suicide drones as well. Controllers were often positioned in multi-story buildings with their drones nearby, giving them the ability to get a clear signal and vision on where to deploy. This was a very primitive version of the current drone program in Ukraine, but it was monstrously effective until electronic countermeasures could and would be brought to bear. So, for those wondering, your average civilian drone that you can buy from, Walmart or Dick Smith or pick a local electronics store, they no longer work in Ukraine because they can be stopped, and they will learn how to be stopped very, very quickly because the signals can just be simply jammed because they operate on very specific frequencies. While the damage done by these drones was in the grand scheme of things minimal, it did set a precedent, and it forced the Iraqis to slow their offensive. This gave ISIS forces the chance to evacuate fighters to Raqqa, the new de facto capital of the caliphate, and time to regroup. The drone strikes continued throughout December and into January, only beginning to cease when Iraqi federal police were able to locate and destroy drone headquarters in places like the Al-Mithaq district. Mosul would be liberated on the 20th of July 2017, but the Islamic State would leave the city a ruin, destroying the 850-year-old Great Mosque for the simple reason they didn't want to surrender it. Thankfully, it has now been rebuilt. However, this battle occurred at a time when everyone in the West didn't really pay much attention, but it set a precedent in motion that drones were a key future tool in urban warfare and small-scale infantry conflicts. Make no mistake, during this war Western observers such as the Australians absolutely paid attention, and so when the drone campaign in Ukraine started, it wasn't as surprising as social and mass media would have you believe. That brings us to Ukraine, where drones initially played a very different role. Notably, the early Russian advance was fought off through a mixture of fighting withdrawals from Javelin-armed troops and Bayraktar drones supported by the abnormally healthy Ukrainian Air Force. See, the initial drone warfare in Ukraine using the larger drones operated by the air forces was, as we are used to from the war in Iraq and the Great War on Terror, larger drones operating missiles such as Hellfire missiles, such as Predator drones, where they would fire down and destroy enemy targets. The smaller FPV drone had yet to make as much of an impact as it has in Ukraine until things started to change. Now, I said abnormally healthy Ukrainian Air Force before because by all accounts the Ukrainian Air Force should not have survived the initial invasion. I sat down a few years ago with a MiG-29 pilot, and he was able to tell me a couple of things about how they managed to survive and keep the fight in the air going. According to this MiG-29 pilot, the Russian Air Force decided to slowly form up and get into attacking positions over the course of a few hours before their advance began. So the Ukrainians, seeing that all of a sudden there was a lot of Russian aircraft on their border, sort of just took off and left, because it was obvious what was coming, and then they moved to secondary and tertiary air bases for future operations. And for a while, that's how the war went. Russian forces could not establish air supremacy over Ukraine itself, and Ukraine could not do the same back to Russia. Pilots would be given the role of missile interception and, if possible, close air support in specific regions where limited air supremacy could be gained. Ukraine would employ their Turkish-built Bayraktar drones to destroy Russian columns when they outpaced their own air support, while Russia would do the same with its domestically produced drones. Of course, this would change following the Ukrainian offensives that recaptured Kharkiv, Oblast, and the city of Kherson, as the Russian forces would begin to employ small first-person drones to stop Ukrainian results from hard positions. Ukraine in return would start to employ its own drones, which, if you want to help pay for some, have a look here. Slowly, both sides would employ more and more drones, forcing a stalemate and creating this situation where Russia is fighting akin to the Western Front during the First World War, pushing forward with immense casualties for tiny scraps of land, trading lives for meters, not unlike the British at the Somme. This kind of evolution in the way the war in Ukraine is being fought is due to multiple factors, not just drones. The drone part comes into the equation when you consider that armour cannot move in the open due to the drones, and due to the threat of infantry and defences. But secondly, each side cannot guarantee air supremacy over the other for significant periods of time, creating the sort of situation which gives the drones time to dominate the skies. A lack of fluidity in combat is what's giving the drones their lethality. This kind of situation does give Ukraine a bit of a home field advantage in the air over the Russians due to the defensive nature of the war, and that is why the Ukrainian Air Force is able to engage in close air support, and with closer in support than you would think they would normally be able to. All of this information though, I'm just another of the dozen voices on the internet talking about it. Why should you listen to me? Well, don't take my word for it, because I asked Ukrainian soldiers about how they handle drone threats. Specifically, I sat down with a Ukrainian sharpshooter to talk about this topic, and again I apologise for the holes here. I'm being very careful with what I say, as I do not want to share any tactics or information to assist the Russians, let alone giving away any classified secrets. Everything I am saying next I have been given the go-ahead to share, so for those who like to have a go at me about OPSEC all the time, believe me, I know the risks. At the beginning of the war, snipers would dominate the battlefields of places like Bakhmut, operating in small squads with often large caliber weapons, basically being a demon to light armoured vehicles, think BMPs and other transports and such. These forces would often deploy via four-wheel drives, think Toyota Hiluxes. However, as drones have changed the nature of warfare, and as lines solidified, men stopped being able to move as much. Note the geography of the East, large and flat, and in many cases open. It is after all the steppe. These small groupings could no longer move in the open, and they could no longer reposition, and without that ability to reposition, sharpshooter squads and small infantry squads were dead. That didn't just impact the sniper squads, that also impacted the regular infantry, and so these two large militaries with a lot of modern equipment between them found themselves unable to move, unless they were willing to take massive casualties, which one side cannot afford. Technically both sides can't afford it, but one side does not care. That brings us to urban combat. It provides cover for the soldiers to operate under and places for men to hide if they can't get away from the drones. So you have this unique situation of Ukraine being willing to cede land to try and fight within urban or forested terrain to mitigate Russian drone strikes, while Russian commanders are very willing to trade lives to get to these politically valuable towns, even if they are just villages. Saying so-and-so we've captured this place is a political win for Russia, because what it does is it allows their bot program and all of their bots online to start spruiking up Russian victories. It is all about propaganda at the end of the day, because it's working. And you can tell it's working because the President of the United States just had his military roll out the red carpet for the bloody man. While on the surface the evolution of the war in Ukraine is wildly different from the war against ISIS in Mosul, there is a clear line of evolution from these small commercial drones that were used in Iraq and the custom-built first-person drones that dominate the battlefields of Ukraine. They have changed the nature of war. Russia can't use large-scale tank pushes to seize points because they will die to drones, be it the Bayraktar drones or be it these smaller FPV drones. So they have to resort to small squads, sent forward under the assumption that casualties can be traded for time and land. The drone still does not replace the importance of armour though. Rather, it is like the advent of planes that bombed trenches during the First World War, another aspect of warfare that now has to be accounted for. Make no mistake too, both sides are working on accounting for these drones, just like they worked on accounting for planes during the First World War. Jamming guns do exist to try and strip the frequencies of the drones, as do other devices that I have seen, which I won't go into. Russia, for example, though, has made use of wire-guided drones to try and avoid jamming, very similar to how wire-guided torpedoes work, just in the air. The future of drone warfare, though, is not just in kamikaze-style attacks. Lately, we have been seeing more and more drones employed in the role of interception. Have a listen to what my friend Richard has started production of.
Good evening, everyone. I have just got back from Kharkiv, Ukraine. We spent 5 days there. We were visiting not only family, but also Achilles, the 429th Regiment. And they had some very exciting new videos to show us. Complete firsts for us, which, I'm trying to figure out whether to release with this video or later on. But let's just say Frontline Kit is taking drones to a all new level, all new altitude, and it's very, very exciting times ahead, because what we've started building is FPV interceptor drones, and these drones are so sought after by the military at the moment, because there's a handful of producers that are actually able to make this stuff work. And thankfully now I can say we've done it. We have done it. We have had our first ever combat hit of one of these FPV drones, taking out a Russian reconnaissance drone. And it's crazy because yesterday we made FPV kamikaze drones, and now we make air defense systems. Because that's what it is. This drone has become an air defense system. It takes out Russian reconnaissance drones, which without them, the Russians are not able to target our guys. They are not able to, because these Russian reconnaissance drones, they have all these high-end cameras on, and they report back the exact locations of the Ukrainian military equipment. So where our tanks, where our artillery, where our FPV crews are. And without these Russian reconnaissance drones, they don't know where our guys are. They just have absolutely no idea. And then that means that their artillery can't operate, that their FPV crews can't operate, that they can't send missiles to kill whatever they have spotted in that location. So our drones are now blinding the enemy. They are destroying Russian reconnaissance drones. They're not killing a Russian. What they are doing is just saving Ukrainian lives. So these are also the first 100% humanitarian drones, which is cool because so many people out there on Twitter really want to support the military. But they want to do it in a way that will just save Ukrainian lives, but not kill, And yes, I may not truly understand that. Maybe I should take some more time to try and figure it out and understand it. But this is an option for those people that really want to make the biggest difference in the war. We now have that, and that is these FPV interceptor drones. It's just cool. And America doesn't have this, Europe doesn't have this. All of these countries are going to have to try and catch up with what the Ukrainians are doing. And as I've said time and time again, it shouldn't be, can Ukraine join NATO? It's, can NATO join Ukraine? We have a battle-proven military. We have the only drone force in the world that has confirmed combat kills, confirmed combat destruction. And now, thanks to the work that, our wonderful German Tim is doing at the factory, we can now say that we are part of the air defense network. And we're having a long chat with the military tonight and a few different friends of, how about we just start taking out Shahed? Because we know that they're going to be sending these 1,000 a night soon. And if we can be producing the drones that take these Shaheds out of the sky, I think there would just be such a level of job satisfaction of we did it, we took out those things that are terrorizing us so much. And I couldn't release the video to you guys, but when we had those 6 Shahed landing directly in front of where we were staying in Kharkiv, that was terrifying. My hands were shaking like crazy, and it was just hit after hit after hit, and these things just plummeting out of the sky like rockets. So the idea is we fly our drones up to the altitude that they're cruising in at. We should be able to get that information of their altitude, and you just sit there with a load of our drones. And these Shaheds, they're not expensive, but they're also not cheap. It's tens of thousands of dollars, where we can make our interceptor for under $1,000. And then you just do the simple calculations of, okay, so we need to, as a country, be producing a few thousand of these a day, and we can take out the Shahed threat. And yeah, it was cool speaking with the military tonight about all of the different design iterations and how effectively it's taking exactly what we've already built, with just a few very, very minor tweaks. So yeah, we have been very, very busy.
That's right, interceptor drones. It is yet another evolution, but it's not as crazy as you might think. See, remember, during the First World War, we had the smaller biplanes coming over the trenches and dropping things like flechettes and bombs. In return, you had the advent of the anti-aircraft gun. Drones now come over and drop devices too, so we're starting to see the advent of anti-drone technology. It is not this newfangled thing. It is not the be-all and end-all. It is a constant state of evolution. Now you may be asking yourself, why am I making this video in the first place? Well, it's twofold. See, I have been saying over and over in this video so far that this is not a massive new thing, that it's an evolution. And secondly, I really hate the people who fawn over Fallout saying war never changes, because it does all the damn time. This is not some kind of black and white argument between everything's changing or nothing's changing. It is rather an argument of evolution. Because guess what? The act of dropping small munitions on foreheads didn't start in Ukraine or Mosul. And it didn't start with just drones. It goes back further. From the moment aerial warfare began, the idea of dropping things on people's heads from these newfangled flying machines was a big winner in the eyes of military planners, and mostly in Britain's case, guys in a shed called Dave. It's very easy to see the direct line between this kind of warfare and modern drone warfare. FPV drones in Ukraine quite often drop explosives with sharp things in them, not unlike these things called flechettes from the First World War. A flechette, or an aerial dart, they're essentially short steel rods with a sharp point on one end and fins at the other. These weapons were originally invented by the Italians just prior to the war in the early 1910s. It was during the First World War that they were allegedly first used in combat, and this was undertaken by the French in 1914. And then they were later employed by the British and the Germans. With atypical humour, the Germans would go ahead and actually stamp their flechettes in French with "invented in France, German made." These weapons would be dropped from either aeroplanes or, in some cases, airships if they wanted to drop a lot of them, in great numbers, usually from a canister that would hold about 20 from a small biplane, or triplane in the Germans' case sometimes, or to a larger canister on an airship, or a larger bomber with 250 darts. One French airman in 1915 in March dropped 18,000 in a single day over the German lines. The idea was that by dropping them at great heights, they would acquire sufficient momentum, think like a bullet, to allow them to pierce the heads or bodies of enemy soldiers or civilians. This isn't an uncommon theory. It was actually an episode of Mythbusters that was all about dropping coins off the Empire State Building and whether or not they would get fast enough to kill someone. The canisters were attached under the fuselage or straight underneath the wings. The wire was then pulled to open the bottom of the canister into the cockpit, which released the flechettes. It's all very Looney Tunes before you consider how just gruesome it could get when the darts actually hit home. Against troops and civilians, their success was pretty variable though. There are accounts of men being killed by flechettes which were recorded as making thin but deep wounds. Flechettes were primarily used in the early war, although some were still being used up to January 1917. The British did find them to be unsatisfactory though. To work they had to score a direct hit, but there was no opportunity to direct them once they had been released from the aircraft, and as time passed, air forces moved towards using bombs or grenades. sometimes thrown directly from the pilot in the cockpit. Some people will say that this and a drone strike from an FPV drone are completely different, but in reality they aren't. It is just evolution. The biplane and the pilot throwing the bomb at the trench below is now just a drone being controlled from a distance, dropping the same thing or flying into the object. So while war changes, this isn't merely an evolution of conflict rather than a groundbreaking game changer. You're just taking the pilot from the seat in the cockpit and moving the controls 100 kilometers or even a couple hundred meters in the other direction, and then giving it a radio. It's not something completely insane. Now, I was going to end the video there, because I had covered my points, explaining how drones weren't new, rather they are just a continued evolution of warfare that has its origins deep in the Cold War and even way back into the First World War and the War on Terror. But it's me. As much as I don't want to be it, I am the Russian Navy guy, so we can't really go into a video on drones without talking about the Russian Navy and how it has been thoroughly beaten by drones, because to be completely honest, it shouldn't have. Russia should not have lost a single ship to a drone. While the land war in Ukraine has been a constant titanic tug-of-war, the naval war has been won by Ukraine. No matter which way you slice it, Russia has lost control over the Black Sea completely. It can no longer interdict and close the port of Odessa with its forces in the Black Sea. It cannot seize Snake Island again, just blankly. It's over for them in the Black Sea. Treaty limitations surrounding the Bosphorus dictate that the Russians cannot move large vessels from the Pacific or other fleets to the Black Sea, which limits the major vessels in the fleet to 3 modern frigates and 2 half-century vintage Soviet frigates, along with a half-dozen submarines. Of those modern frigates, it's relatively rumoured that 1 or 2 of them are damaged. These ships themselves, though, lack the ability to leave port due to the number of risks from drone attack. Smaller ships, such as the corvettes, can still reach the Black Sea through internal rivers and canals inside European Russia, but these too have no capability to threaten access to Odessa. To put it blankly, while the ships still exist as a fleeting being, they cannot undertake their missions to seize control of the sea. Therefore, Russia has surrendered control of the sea to Ukraine, losing the naval war. That's going to really upset some Vatniks in the comments. I'm expecting some really spicy stuff from saying that, but it's true, they've lost the naval war. The Moskva is actually a good place to start here with how they lost the naval war, not because of the way she sunk, that was by Neptune missiles, but rather the state she was in when she was sunk. See, a Slava-class cruiser should have been able to destroy 2 missiles with either close-in weapon systems or through interceptors. But the fact was the ship was in such a bad condition that she couldn't make headway at any more than half a head for extended periods of time. The electric dynamos barely worked, the firefighting equipment was locked away to prevent theft because, well, it's a warship from Kleptomanian Federation. Of the 7 CIWS systems, only 1 or maybe 2 were actually working, with the remainder being cannibalized to keep those 2 working. And there's so much more, and this was the flagship of the Black Sea Fleet. Hell, it's rumoured pretty heavily, almost 100% confirmable, that the ship either had to choose between using its radio or its air search radars. And when it was using its air search radars, because it was focusing on a Bayraktar drone that was up in the air not too far from it, it couldn't see the missiles that were coming to slam into it. The Russians claimed this was because it was a really rough day or a choppy day at sea and it was a storm that sank the Moskva. But that begs the question, if it was a storm and it wasn't missiles, 1, where did the photo of it on fire come from, and 2, how did you build a cruiser that was in such a bad state that it got sunk by a storm in this weather? Compare the Moskva to the Kuznetsov, another so-called flag vessel, or the Nakhimov, which has only just entered the sea and under its own power after, I think it's been now a 14.5-year refit, was meant to take a couple of years. I mean, come on, the Kuznetsov itself is so clapped out that there's a bloody SCP story about having decks sealed off. The thing is a floating biohazard. The larger Kirov class also suffers from sudden rushes of oopsie, with the Veliki barely sailing anymore, and as I mentioned, the Nakhimov now so delayed in returning to service, it's going to take a miracle for it to actually get into the Navy. But what does this have to do with drones? Well, these drones, their success is largely down not to their innovation, but down to Russia's inability to maintain and prepare its naval forces for attacks of this nature. See, these kind of attacks, while they look fancy and they look, wow, it's so modern with these drones, they're not new. Sure, the novelty of a drone may be new, But attacks from small, fast-moving craft have been an issue faced by military forces for over a century now. For example, the attack on USS Cole in the year 2000. Small, fast-moving craft are massive threats to large vessels, be it the Cole in 2000 or the Svend Istvan during the First World War, which was sunk by an Italian Mars boat. This is not a new threat. Rather, again, like on land, this is an evolution of established tactics, and historically in the naval sense, this is called the jeu de colle. It is a French tactic implemented after the absolute walloping for 50 years of the French Navy, where they decided we can never go toe-to-toe with the Royal Navy in terms of capital ship strength, so what we will do is we'll get smaller vessels such as torpedo boats. Hear the Kamchatka in the distance. Or other small destroyer vessels that can attack and destroy larger warships through massed assaults, or through getting in under the guns. Small vessels used together can and do overwhelm larger ships, which is why navies began to invest in secondary weapons to destroy these kinds of vehicles. The Nordic countries famously invested in fleets of smaller ships or smaller coastal defense ships to stop larger powers from getting in amongst them and destroying them, using their geography such as the fjords to cause absolute havoc. We see this with things like the Blucher, but also the entire Swedish Navy in the Second World War was built on the basis that if they had to destroy an invader, they could use their geography to do it. In fact, there are some documents that suggest that the existence of the Swedish Navy, although on paper much weaker, is one of the key reasons why the Germans never went to war with Sweden in the Second World War. But the fact that these small vessels do exist, and they have existed for years, is why navies have begun to invest in secondary weapons again to destroy these kinds of vehicles, be it secondary gun batteries such as this on the Missouri, which is very much there to destroy smaller ships and as an anti-aircraft platform, but also in the modern sense, modern navies such as the United States Navy with the Arleigh Burke or the Australian Navy with the Hobart class use weapons such as this Typhoon autocannon mount, which begs the question, why doesn't Russia? And the answer to this is, it does. It does have these kinds of weapons. The Navy, though, just is in such a state that it can't afford to train and maintain its ships to fight against these threats. Drone boats such as Sea Baby should not be able to do things like this. They should be destroyed quickly and effectively, but they just aren't. Partially this does come down to a ship design, lack of firing arcs and such, but more than anything it comes down to a lax attitude to watchkeeping, training and maintenance. So for those people who do think large warships are useless because drones exist, Sky News Australia fans looking at you, please for the love of God use that one brain cell to realise geography matters and the situation facing Russia is very different than a hypothetical Western war against China. Drones at sea, like on land, do little to change the ball game, but they do change it. They create risks closer to land, sure, but those risks were already there. Using geography to hide weaponry and defeat warships is a tale as old as time itself. For example, I just did a video on the Israeli Navy with the INS Eilat and its sinking by the Egyptian Navy. The Blucher was absolutely walloped by close-in shore-based weapons, and more. Alternatively though, if these drones can be mass-produced, that does mean smaller, wealthy nations such as Taiwan will be able to employ newer, far deadlier strategies against possible landings from large enemy powers. But drones alone cannot win wars, and that's why Ukraine itself is investing in new warships designed to operate with these drones, to enhance their lethality, including Swedish CB-90 fast attack craft, the Mark 6 patrol boat, the Gagauz M. These small, fast craft can operate with drone vessels, while being supported at a distance from the much larger missile-armed ships ordered from the United Kingdom and the Ada-class corvettes ordered from Turkey. And of course, the drones also have their own benefits in the sense that they can operate very stealthily and they can attack ports during the night or during periods of time. They can sneak up on ships that are at anchor. But again, this is not new. Commando raids did this during the Second World War. Famously, the Crate, a fishing vessel, sailed all the way up to Singapore with Australian commandos on board, who then snuck into the harbour under the cover of night and blew the ever-loving crap out of quite a few Japanese ships in the harbour. Commandos across of Europe did this as well. The SAS famously exists to do this. Granted, it was initially against planes, but they also did attack the port of Bardia. Again, evolution of warfare. Not a whole new ballgame. So what does this all have to do with drones? Well, I'm trying to reinforce that while drones are important, they are just an evolution of technology and warfare and a part of the modern era. Do they totally change everything? No, they don't. They impact warfare, yes, but they don't change warfare completely, just to an extent. This is not some kind of major insane revolution. It is a continued evolution. It's just part of war, changing as it always does, and as time passes, there'll be another so-called newfangled invention that will make everything else obsolete. 2 years ago, it was hypersonic missiles. China was going to destroy us all because they have hypersonic missiles. Russia was going to destroy us all because they have pretend hypersonic missiles. It's just not a reality. They exist, sure, but again, evolution, not revolution. But just like with the First World War in tanks or the Second World War with aircraft carriers, it will still come down to men and women on the line, no matter how much war does change. Again, I do apologize for quite a few of the holes in this video. I had to be careful and I couldn't say everything I wanted to say because quite simply, I'm not going to reveal information that can help Russia. I'm not. While being impartial in this video while talking about different weapons and such, I still firmly believe there is one side in the right here, and that's the side that is not trying to wipe out life. It's just that simple. So, at the end of all this, when it is all over, and when Ukraine is living in peace again, there will be a lot more we can talk about, and a lot more information about drones that people who have seen them up close can share. But for now, well, anything and everything to help the innocent stay alive. If you enjoyed the video, like, comment, subscribe, all that jazz. Links to Richard's information in the comments, pinned comment below as always. If you think I'm full of crap and you want to have a lecture at me about being some kind of stupid Zoomer, go ahead. It's free engagement. I really don't mind. You just boost me in the algorithm, so go ahead anyway. I'll catch you all next time. And just remember, evolution, not revolution.